Welcome to the August meetup for the Life in Focus Thriving Parent community. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alessandra Wall. I'm a clinical psychologist and a life coach, although I was just writing a post last night about how I am not fond of that title. So I don't know. If I could give any name to what I do, I think I would call it a insight coach. But it sounds cheesy, or how to live your life the way you want to live it right now coach, which is a little too long. This week on the Thriving Parent Hour, I actually wanted to talk to you guys about what it means to thrive. I know that that word is all over my website. It's all over every single message that I put out there, and that it's often misunderstood, or when people understand it, they don't know how to apply it for themselves. And I think that's true not only with non-parents, but with parents too. And it's even more complicated with parents. So the topics for today are going to be, what does it mean to thrive? And the second one is, how the hell do I figure out how to do that, especially as a parent? I've been writing a few articles on the topic. In October's edition of Paleo Magazine, there should be a part 1 of 2 on how to be a thriving parent, so feel free to go grab that. But you guys get the sneak peek. So, thriving, it's interesting. A lot of times people juxtapose 2 terms together. One is the notion of thriving, and the other one is the notion of surviving. So I would venture to say that most of the people who listen to the Life in Focus message are not in the category of truly surviving. As parents, we often feel like we're simply surviving the days, but I'm going to shift our language a little bit and talk about getting by. And I think that that's what a lot of people end up doing in life. They get by. They make do. They get through their day. And call me an idealist, but I completely disagree with that as a lifestyle. I think regardless of what your views are about life after death, there is one life to live right now, and we are guaranteed this one. And I believe I owe it to myself to live it as well as possible. Now, I want to make clear that as well as possible is a relative concept. So somebody who has a whole bunch of advantages and a whole bunch of resources is going to have possibly an easier time living an as well as possible life as somebody who's really strapped financially, strapped in terms of time, strapped in terms of opportunities in life. That being said, if we tell ourselves that we are limited by our circumstances, then really what we are doing is handcuffing ourselves. And I have met enough people as a psychologist who have had horrible life circumstances and have managed to make the best life they can make with it. And that's really what has informed my desire and my approach on the notion of thriving and life in focus. At the end of the day, guys, you have one life to live. You can live it really well, or you can just get by. And I think the problem is, if you just get by, you'll end up finding that at some point in time, you're going to look back and you're going to regret your choices. And in my opinion, that regret is probably one of the worst feelings you can have. I'm, like most people, pretty averse to failing and making mistakes. I hate finding out that I approached something the wrong way. But I'd rather approach something the wrong way, make mistakes, and fail at trying to live a great life and live a great story than simply getting by and looking back and feeling like my life was mediocre. So that's why at Life in Focus, and why personally in my life, I talk so much about thriving. So what does it mean to thrive? Well, every person is going to have a different definition. I think at baseline, when you look at thriving, it means that you live your life in the best way you can given the circumstances you've been dealt with. Thriving means you do whatever you can do so that when you wake up in the morning, you can look forward to most of your days. I'm not an idealist. I'm pretty realistic. Life is not even keeled. Some days suck. Some periods of our life suck and are difficult and are trying. And so it would be ridiculous of me to insinuate that it's possible to live every single day and feel excited about every single day. But I think there's a way to live life where most days you wake up and you have something to look forward to. And in my mind, that is thriving. When I talk about thriving, I contrast two states. One state is the one in which I think too many people live nowadays, and especially many parents, which is overbooked and underwhelmed. And when I talk about underwhelmed, I mean uninspired by the things that you're filling your day with. In contrast, when I think of somebody who's thriving, I imagine them just as busy, because I don't think it's possible not to be busy nowadays, but busy and engaged, busy and fulfilled, busy and excited. So what does thriving mean? Thriving means that you have built into your life things that make you feel engaged, fulfilled, and happy. And those things don't need to be big things, right? A lot of times when people think about life coaches and life changes, they come and they talk about people who've made these huge shifts in their life. People who've gone from the corporate world to becoming yoga gurus or whatever, things like that. And although that's really exciting, and it actually happens, and it happens more often than you think, it's not the only way to start building some of that change in your life. That is the only part of defining thriving that I can do or that I can provide for you. Because the other piece of thriving, the how-to, has to do with what's right for you. And that's your own personal definition. So when people say, well, what do you mean when you say, would you rather get by or thrive or survive or thrive? What I explain is that latter part. I want to go from being overbooked and underwhelmed by my life to being busy but engaged and fulfilled. I want to wake up most days with something to look forward to. I want to know that I'm not just getting by, but that I'm living a life that's actually engaging and exciting, right? My definition of engaging and exciting might have nothing to do with yours or the person next to you. So when we talk about what does one do, how do you get to a place where you can thrive, the second big piece to think about is that you have to understand what's right for you. Now, this is critical. In my line of profession, and also oftentimes with the kind of people I work with, there's a lot of talking about what's right. The right thing to do, the right approach to take, the right steps, the right education, the right job, the right parenting. And that's all good and well that we have some standards about how things could be done, can be done. But we need to be careful not to mistake that with a should, right? So, for example, with parenting, for some parents, being stay-at-home parents is what you should do. Some people will say, well, if you took the time to make children, one of the parents should be home and should be there to educate and be with the kids at all times. And I disagree. That is one way of parenting. It is one way of doing it. It is something either people sacrifice to do or sometimes people can afford to do. But for many of us, it's not what's right for us. Other people will talk about how important it is to work and to show a model of a strong mother, for example, an educated mother, an independent mother. I think there are a lot of ways of doing that. And getting a job and being a working mom is not necessarily the one way to do it. Right for you is a very specific thing. And in order to thrive, you have to be able to start defining what's right for you, what you need and how you need to approach life in order to feel good and feel fulfilled. Right for you is a complicated concept, and at the same time, it's really, really, really simple. So I recently wrote a post on doing right versus right for you, and I'll be reposting that on the Life in Focus blog. Sorry, I've got something in my eye. And one of the things I point out is that right and right for you often intersect, right? There are few situations, like a Venn diagram, there are few situations where right for you is completely at the opposite of what your community, your culture, your value system, or society dictates is right. But they're not necessarily entirely overlapping. In order to find right for you, or in order to figure out whether or not you are doing what's right for you, one of the things I recommend is stopping and simply on a daily basis asking yourself, am I happy? And then asking yourself, do I feel overbooked at the end of most days? Do I feel overwhelmed? Are there things I do on a daily basis that bring me joy, satisfaction, or pleasure? These are not lofty questions. They're certainly not questions that one should look at and think are superfluous or only for people who have the time and the money to think about such things, because we're talking about your life. And since we're talking about your life, you should be plugged in and wanting to live it well. So happy is a really interesting question. I found that when I ask that question to people, they actually get scared. And so when I ask people then a follow-up, right, what are the things that make you happy? Most adults get even more scared. And I think part of it is because they really, really struggle to define what it means to be happy, what it means to be fulfilled. One of the ways I've found of doing that is through the focus map. And those of you who have purchased the Thriving Parent package, you have that focus map in there. And for those of you who don't, who haven't purchased the package or who don't know what the focus map is, it's a single question that came from my initial intake. And it's the question that people responded to the most positively and the most eagerly in the initial intake I created for my coaching practice. The question goes something like this. Imagine that you're 80, you're an older person, whatever, 80, 90, not dying, right? You're still living. And somebody younger comes up to you and asks you, have you lived well? And in response to that question, you say, yes, all in all, I am satisfied with how I lived my life. What do you use to justify that answer? I ask people when they take this test to really take the time to stop and think about what kind of things they would build into their life and what kind of things they have lived up until now that would allow them to say that they have lived well. Not got by, not done okay, lived well, right? Which is part of my definition of thriving. In the process of doing this exercise, there's a portion of what people write down that has to do with the life they've already lived. And there's a portion of things people will write down that has to do with fantasy, with a life that has not yet arrived. And in that fantasy portion, I always encourage you to actually take the time and dream. What are the things you would put down in your description of events that helped you live well, if you could have any life you want? People struggle with this. Adults, excuse me, especially struggle with this. We have stopped learning how to dream. We have stopped learning how to think big. When I go through this with people one-on-one, very often the first iteration of the focus map has to be tweaked. And the reason is that the way people approach this question is by asking themselves not, what would I like to do? What would it take for me to live well and to thrive? But rather, what can I do? And what can I do limits you. It limits you to every single circumstance, barrier, and mental barrier, cognitive barrier, emotional barrier that you are living with today. It censors your thinking, and it censors the process, and that limits you for the future. So if you want to thrive, if you're asking yourself, how can I start to thrive today? I would say the first thing you need to do is get a really good idea of what it means to do what's right for you. And one way to do that is to ask yourself the question that's on the focus map. Anybody can download the focus map. It is available for free at lifeinfocussd.com. Or if you want the parents version, which has been kind of simplified and focused more on really parents' needs, that is available with the Thriving Parent package. And you can also find that package on lifeinfocussd.com. But oftentimes when I work on a focus map with somebody, I was saying that I end up having to go through it with them again. And one of the things that I end up having to do is teach them to think big and to dream big. And we stop and look at the narrative that they're creating, the storyline. And notice I use the word narrative. And the reason I use that word is because too often people's first versions of the focus map are bullet points. But bullet points are limiting. Bullet points don't let you get into the mindset of what it takes to live well. So I'll ask people to write a narrative, and you're going to ask yourself, listen, if I were to say I lived a great life, if I were to say I lived a great story, what would I say I did? How do I want to live my life? And from that, you're going to get an ideal, an idealized view of what your life could be. The next step you can do with that is use that idealized view to figure out what are major themes. And there's a way then of using that dream to come up with a real life expression of what right for you looks like. Learning to thrive is a choice. It is something all of us can do. But it starts with stopping, taking the time to ask yourself what you want, taking a closer look at that, and then problem solving around that topic. And what I mean by problem solving is really stopping to think about, how do I get what I want in the world I live in today? Brain freeze. It's because it's hot and I don't have the air conditioning in here. How do I get the world I want in the world I live in today? And so we come back to that notion of circumstances that I was discussing at the beginning of our chat today. We all have different circumstances, but thriving is a relative concept. It has to do with living the best life you can possibly live given your life circumstances and your availability. So I've spoken with a few moms recently online. I'd love to speak with more dads, but the moms have been the one who have been more chatty and more communicative. And they have talked about the difficulty doing these things when they're single mothers or when they're working mothers, or the guilt that comes with trying to set time aside for yourself and live well and thrive when you have the responsibility of caring for so many other children and so many other lives, children, spouses, family members. My answer to them is this, and I know it's like beating a dead horse, but this is so important. When you thrive, your family thrives too. When you live well, the people around you live a better life. When you are happy, when you are fulfilled, when you are modeling what it looks like to take care of yourself, You are being the best parent you can be for your children. So is it difficult to do this as a parent? Absolutely. The fact is, children demand your attention constantly. And when you have an infant, you think that's going to get better when they become preschoolers, but it's hard, and it's hard in a completely different way. And when you have preschoolers and young elementary school kids like mine, you imagine that it's going to get better when they're teenagers. But parents of teenagers will tell you that it's just as hard in a different way. So you can stop and wait and put your life on hold until your kids grow up. But at a minimum, that's what, 20 years if you only have a single child. And if you have multiple children, and God forbid they're like, several years apart, you might be talking about a quarter century spent putting your life on hold because there are other things to do, and you don't want to take the time to think about what it means to thrive for you and think about what's right for you. So how does a parent do it? Well, okay, one of the things I was talking about was go grab the focus map, fill it out, complete it. I've told people, if you're on the community, you're more than welcome to shoot me questions. If you're not on the community for the Thriving Parent and you are a parent, it's a Facebook community. Ask to enter. I'm sure we will grant you access. But you can also email me directly. But another way to do it, if you don't feel like you have the time to do that, is to just stop. And I believe, I know, all of us busy parents, all of us human beings have 5 minutes we can devote every single day to asking ourselves how our day went, what was great about it, and what was lacking. And I think that's a really good place to start. When you talk about figuring out how to thrive, the first place you have to get is insight. And that's not just thriving. In my practice, and by the way, this is my office as opposed to my home office, which is where I often run these. In my practice as a psychologist, that's the first thing we always do with people. The first thing we do is help them stop, think, and look at themselves. Look at their thoughts, look at their choices, look at their needs. And then we go from there and we figure out how to shape their lives, how to shape their thoughts, how to shape their behaviors to create the life they want. In therapy, we're talking about bringing people back from lower functioning to like a baseline. In coaching and with you guys, what I want to talk about is taking your baseline and elevating it so that you're not just living an okay life, you're living a great life. You're living a great story. So that starts with taking the time to stop and ask yourself, how's my day going? Was today good? Do I feel overwhelmed? What was missing? Take notes when you do this. 5 minutes. All of us have 5 minutes every single day. That's those 3.5 minutes while food is heating up in the microwave. It's right after you put the kids down to bed before you start on your next task. It's giving up a few minutes of TV or social media to stop and focus on yourself. If you take these notes daily, what I know will happen is you will start finding themes reoccurring, right? So when I was in the process of figuring all of this stuff out for myself, I know that one of the themes that kept on popping up is that I felt constantly overwhelmed. My days were filled with really lots of fun and entertaining things, but at the end of the day, these fun and entertaining things were not engaging. I had time with friends, I had a book club, I had a great job, I had fantastic kids, I got to the gym, but I always felt like I was rushing from one event to the next, to the next, to the next. And so even stuff that was supposed to be fun wasn't fun. Those 5 minutes every day, those 5 minutes spent like for a week or two, just jotting down those thoughts, helped me realize that one of the things that was right for me was actually to pare down my social life. And so it forced me to stop and think very carefully about who I wanted to spend a lot of time with and what were the kinds of things I wanted to spend doing with them. And that epiphany, that insight came simply from stopping and asking myself every single day, how was your day? How did you live it? What do you wish you'd had? And the thoughts always came back, more time, more downtime. But I also wanted the social engagement, and I wanted to go to the gym, and I wanted my business to thrive, and I wanted to feel more engaged at work, and I wanted to see my husband, and I wanted to play with my kids, right? Sounds familiar? It's probably the way most human beings, and especially most parents, feel. There are all these things we want to do, all these things we should be doing, right? And yet things don't feel right. So if you're watching this and you took just a minute to ask yourself how your day's been going, can you answer those questions? How are you feeling? Have you been overwhelmed today? Have you gotten everything you need? And if not, what has been missing? Now, once you do this exercise for a few days, as I said, what's going to happen is you're going to find a theme. So the next question as a parent is, well, what do I do with that? Because unfortunately, insight is necessary, but not sufficient to making change. So you're going to have this ideal. Most of the time it's the ideal, that what do I need, what do I miss? And this is where you have to kind of start getting creative. There are a number of ways of doing this. I don't know of any succinct way right now to explain exactly how to approach it. It's on a case-per-case basis. But let's say, for example, one of the things you're noticing, because it's a big one and it's something that came up again and again and again in a recent survey that I gave several parents, was time for myself, right? And I don't know a single parent who will say they don't need time for themselves. The question becomes then to define that a little bit better. Time for yourself is a theme. If you were doing the focus map, I guarantee it would come out as a theme. So what does time for yourself look like in your fantasy? Are you spending time for yourself sleeping? Are you spending time for yourself doing a specific hobby? Are you spending time for yourself hanging out with friends? Once you've defined that, now again, you can get to a point where you can choose an action. And because we're all busy, and because change is scary, and because changing habits is so difficult, the one thing I would recommend doing is finding the smallest increment of change that you can affect now. And that now piece is crucial. Don't choose something that's going to take you 3 months to put in place. You have to start making an immediate change, and that's going to get the ball rolling. That's going to convince you to put in the effort to make those changes that take 3 months to change. So last week I was working with a parent here, and we were talking about thriving, and we were talking about time for themselves and exercising, and we talked about exercising again and again and again, and they don't get it done. And they actually have time in their schedule now, and they don't get it done. So I stopped and I asked them, when was the last time that they engaged in exercise that they really, really loved it? And they went back all the way to childhood. And they were talking about how much they loved as a child to bike. And how much as a child they really loved just going around their neighborhood in their bike. And that was it. That's what we decided to settle on. This is somebody who's really busy, who has 2 children with autism spectrum disorders, who once the school year starts is in one appointment after the next, after the next, after the next. Their focus, the thing that's the most important to them is being a parent, but they are also a professional and they need that right now. And they are awful and taking care of themselves and doing things for themselves. But everything else we would come up with was too big. And so all they're going to do is that night was to fill their tires in their bike with some air and go bike around the neighborhood and see how that feels, to feel that joy, to do that small action that's going to fulfill a larger need, taking care of me. And over time, building in that habit, create more and more opportunities to thrive. So let me go over this one more time. To thrive just means to live your life well. To live it, given your circumstances, the best way you can. The definition of thriving that's going to fit for you is not necessarily the same as the one that's going to fit for me. And that's because there's a difference between doing what's right and doing what's right for you. So I could tell you that in order to thrive, you have to unplug, you have to rest, you have to focus on yourself all the time. I could tell you that in order to thrive, you have to exercise several times a week and you have to eat well. And actually, on a physiological basis, those are the things that you would need to thrive. However, I'm not you. And I don't know what your life looks like. And I certainly don't know what's important to you and what you value. Only you know those things. And those are the basis of what's going to determine what's right for you. So in order to thrive, you have to live a life that isn't just right, but is right for you. And one of the ways you can do that is by actually taking the time to stop on a daily basis and ask yourself, how am I doing? How is my day gone? Have I missed anything? Have I needed anything today that I didn't get? And what would that be? Take the time to do that every day for 2 weeks. If you're part of the Thriving Parent community, comment about it on the post. I guarantee you will find a theme. Once you find a theme, your first order is to find the smallest way in which you can enact that theme in your day. What holds so many of us back, especially parents, is that we are overbooked. And so when we think about change and when we think about ways of fitting ourselves into our life, we get overwhelmed because it's one more thing. So if we make it small, that one more thing doesn't become overwhelming. And what you will find over time is that you actually can't do one more thing. I know I just contradicted myself, but what I mean is this. If you need to make big changes, you're going to have to sacrifice some things. I gave the example earlier for me about how I really wanted to have a social life, but in order to not feel overwhelmed all the time by all my obligations, social and other, I had to pare down certain aspects of my social life. That meant losing connections, it meant losing some friends, and it's not like that didn't hurt, but I'm a far happier, more balanced and engaged friend now than I was then. And I'm still not engaged as engaged as I'd like to be, because right now life and focus and building my business takes priority. But that's the other piece. We talk a lot, and I say we, life coaches, pop psychology, people, about life-work balance and balance in life. I don't believe there's any such thing as balance when your idea of balance is having everything be equal in your life. Penelope Trunk wrote a great article about this, and I did post it on the Thriving Parent page, about how balance for her at a certain point in time meant really throwing herself into her job. And it made her a happier, better, more fulfilled individual. And so a lot of other parents might have looked at her and said that that was wrong, but it was the right choice for her. She doesn't believe that that work-life balance or work-parenthood balance is possible. I think she said you can either be great at parenting, great at your job, or mediocre at both. But one of the nice things about her post is that she's okay with being mediocre at both, right? And I doubt she's actually mediocre at both. But what she's saying is she understands that you can't expect perfection in all areas. In order to thrive, you have to make certain choices. You have to understand what matters to you, and you have to go for the things that matter to you. In order to understand what matters to you, you have to stop and check in with yourself. You have to learn to make the distinction between right and right for you. I will be posting later on this week on the Life in Focus Facebook page, on the Life in Focus blog, and on the Thriving Parent page, an article I wrote for Paleo Magazine on the difference between right and right for you. And then, as I said, later on this month, there will be in the print edition of Paleo Magazine an article on what it means to be a thriving parent and why I think so many of us are struggling as parents to thrive. What I'd like to see people who've watched this video cast do is take the time every single day for the next week to ask yourself how your day and how your life is going. And if you find yourself consistently feeling like you are overwhelmed, if you find yourself consistently feeling like you are just getting by, to stop and acknowledge that you're not thriving. And to realize that thriving is not just something that is possible for the elite or for people with money, but it's something all of us can do. That it is relative to our circumstances, but that we owe it to ourselves to live the best lives we can live, given what we have. And that once you do that, it's not that you stop being busy. You will be just as busy as you were before. But instead of feeling overbooked and underwhelmed, you're going to feel busy, but engaged, plugged in, and fulfilled. You're going to be able to look back on most of your days, and more importantly, look forward to most of your days and feel excited. And that doesn't mean that the kids won't get to you, and it doesn't mean that there aren't days you won't be tired and cranky and dragging your feet. It just means that overall, if you make the changes that you need to make, when you look back on your life at 80 and some kid asks you if you lived well, your answer is going to be a resounding yes. All in all, you will have done everything it took to live well. Now, I know we have a few viewers here today, and I don't know if you have any questions, but if you do, there is a chat link to the right of your screen, and I would be glad to answer any questions you might have. And while I wait for those, I'll reiterate that there are several resources that you can use on the lifeinfocussd.com website. Also, if you're part of the Thriving Parent group, please feel free to throw questions on that Facebook page. It is there exactly for that. I will be talking in the next couple weeks specifically about different steps we can take to thrive, and I will be eventually, once it comes out, because that's coming out now in December, in another publication, writing about, like, I don't know, I have to figure out the number, 4 or 5. I hate lists. I don't, but I'll figure out a list of steps to take to thrive. And in the meantime, just think about it this way. Life doesn't need to be overwhelming. It can be busy. There can be days that are overwhelming, but if overwhelming is your every day, if overwhelming is your most days, you're not thriving. And as a busy parent, you owe it to yourself to take 5 minutes every single day to stop and ask yourself, how are you living? What's missing? And to take action on those. Well, that was Thriving this week. I know school is starting next week, and we had a few questions about school specifically to answer. So parents, next month we'll focus on how to survive getting back to school. And next month's video call will be at its regularly scheduled time, which should be the second Thursday of the month, as opposed to this late into the game. Thank you very much. Once again, I'm Alessandra Wall. What did I say earlier? Insight coach, how to live your life right now coach, life coach. I'm not fond of that title. And you can find me at lifeinfocussd.com or on Facebook at Life in Focus. Thanks. Bye.